Two drones fell near the Dubai International Airport, raising fresh security concerns.
Yeah, straight to the airport. Oh my God.
And we also have a confirmation from Qatar Airways. All flights have been suspended.
Hundreds of thousands of stranded passengers and workers are just trying to leave the Middle East after airlines canceled flights throughout the region.
Something happened recently that I genuinely did not expect to be covering on this channel. Not because it was unpredictable, looking back, the signs were there, but because the scale of what it revealed about how fragile global aviation actually is hit me harder than I anticipated. The Gulf went dark. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha, three of the busiest airports on Earth, three of the most important connecting hubs in the history of commercial aviation, all either closed, suspended, or operating at a fraction of normal capacity simultaneously. Passengers stranded across 6 continents. Over 1 million people displaced in the first few days alone. A KLM Boeing 787 Dreamliner sitting on the tarmac at Dubai International for 12 days because the airline judged it would be irresponsible to fly passengers home through airspace where missiles and drones were being intercepted. The aircraft eventually left empty, routing the long way home via Saudi Arabia and Egypt, avoiding the Gulf entirely. 2 Boeing 787 Dreamliners sitting on an apron in Scotland because there was nowhere safe to fly them home. And while all of this was happening, I kept thinking about one question that I do not think enough people are asking. What if this is not a temporary disruption? What if this lasts not days or weeks, but months? What does that actually mean for how the world moves? Because the answer is not just inconvenient, it is structurally catastrophic in ways that most people, even aviation enthusiasts, have not fully thought through. That is exactly what I wanted to talk about in this new video. Let me start with a number that I think reframes this entire conversation. Between Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha, they handled over 200 million passengers last year. Dubai International alone processed over 92 million, making it the world's busiest international airport for 10 consecutive years. Hamad International in Doha handled over 52 million. These are not regional airports that happen to be disrupted. These are the connective tissue of the global aviation system. And here is the thing that took me a while to fully appreciate when I started researching this for this video. These hubs did not just get big. They reorganized the entire geography of long-haul aviation around themselves. Think about what happened over the past 20 years. Emirates, Qatar Airways, and Etihad built hub and spoke networks of extraordinary scale at the geographic midpoint of the Great Circle routes between Europe and South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Africa, and Australasia. A passenger flying from Manchester to Mumbai, connecting through Dubai, travels barely further than on a direct route because Dubai sits almost exactly at the midpoint. Same for Paris to Bangkok. Same for London to Nairobi. Same for Rome to Melbourne. As Gulf carriers captured these connecting routes, European carriers that had previously operated direct services progressively withdrew them. The economics stopped working once Gulf competitors were offering better frequencies, better products, and lower fares on the same city pairs. British Airways no longer flies to many of the destinations it served directly 30 years ago. Lufthansa pulled back from certain African routes, although I must point out that Brussels Airlines, a member of the Lufthansa group, took over that part. Air France reduced South Asian frequencies. The Gulf carriers filled every gap they created. What that means today is that a very large proportion of the world's long-haul connecting traffic has no practical alternative if the Gulf is closed. It is not one option among many. For many city pairs, it is the primary option. And for some, it is the only one with an acceptable travel time. Right now, as I am making this video, here is what the alternative routing picture actually looks like. Istanbul is the single hub most structurally prepared to absorb Gulf connecting traffic. Turkish Airlines has built its network specifically around Istanbul's geographic position at the intersection of Europe, Asia, and Africa. It serves over 300 destinations. Its hub was specifically designed with the capacity to handle significant additional connecting volume. Every day the Gulf stays closed is a day in which corporate travel managers and leisure passengers discover that Istanbul works for their routing. Some proportion of them will not undiscover it. Singapore Airlines and Air India are the primary beneficiaries on the Europe to Asia corridor. Singapore through Changi, Mumbai through Chhatrapati Shivaji. Both are already seeing surging demand, with Air India operating dozens of additional flights right now to absorb overflow. The London to Bangkok corridor alone has over 50,000 passengers currently stranded in Thailand, with Thai Airways and British Airways running additional frequencies on longer southern routings, adding 2 to 4 hours to journey times. Ethiopian Airlines is the most significant beneficiary on African routes. Addis Ababa sits in the geographic center of the African continent, and Ethiopian has spent 30 years building the Pan-African hub infrastructure to serve it. Passengers who previously connected through Dubai to reach Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, or Lagos are discovering the Addis Ababa alternative right now. But here is the honest truth about all of these alternatives. They are not sufficient, not even close to sufficient. Hamad International alone handles over 50 million connecting passengers annually. Singapore's Changi handles 60 million total, domestic and international combined. You cannot redirect 50 million connecting passengers through Singapore. You cannot build the capacity that would require in weeks or months. You cannot unretire the aircraft that European carriers withdrew when Gulf competition made direct services uneconomical. You cannot instantly rebuild the pilot bases, the slot allocations, and the bilateral traffic rights that would allow legacy European carriers to restore the routes they abandoned. If the Gulf stays closed for a prolonged period, a significant portion of this traffic does not get redirected. It simply disappears. Routes become uneconomical. Connections that existed last month do not exist next month. Passengers who were planning to fly do not fly. I want to talk about specific corridors, because I think this is where the human reality of what I am describing becomes concrete. South Asia to Europe is the most affected. The Indian subcontinent, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, together, they generate enormous aviation demand to London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Paris, Rome. Much of this traffic currently connects through Dubai or Doha, not because there are no alternatives, but because Gulf carriers offer the most frequent services at the most competitive prices with the most convenient schedules. The diaspora communities across the UK and Europe, whose entire family connectivity depends on affordable connections to Karachi, Dhaka, Colombo, and Kathmandu, are among the passengers most immediately and most painfully affected. East Africa to the rest of the world is the second most exposed corridor. Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, Entebbe, Addis Ababa itself. These cities have built tourism industries and export supply chains that depend on reliable air connections. Gulf carriers handle a huge proportion of the connecting traffic between East Africa and South and Southeast Asia. If that connectivity degrades for months, the economic consequences extend well beyond missed flights. Australia to Europe is the third. The kangaroo route between Australia and the UK currently flows heavily through Dubai, on Emirates, and through Singapore. A prolonged Gulf closure would force Australia-Europe carriers onto southern routings via South Africa, adding 4 to 6 hours to journeys that are already among the longest in commercial aviation. Some routings would simply stop being economical with current aircraft. Qantas's Project Sunrise flights to London and uses Airbus A350 aircraft specifically configured for the ultra-long-haul mission. Even those aircraft would face challenging economics on fully southern routings. I also want to be straight with you about the financial dimension of this, because it is significant in ways that will affect passengers whether or not they ever fly through the Gulf themselves. Emirates' entire business model depends on Dubai International. The airline has no domestic routes. Every revenue passenger connects through one hub. A prolonged closure of that hub is, functionally, a prolonged cessation of Emirates' business. The airline has substantial cash reserves, but at Emirates scale, burning reserves without incoming revenue is a matter of months before the financial pressure becomes severe. Qatar Airways is backed directly by the Qatari government, which has historically provided financial support when required. Etihad is backstopped by Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth. These state backing structures provide resilience that commercially financed carriers would not have. But state backing does not eliminate commercial damage. It defers and absorbs it, and there are limits to how long even sovereign wealth can absorb losses at Gulf carrier scale. What the state backing cannot fix is the permanent competitive damage. Corporate travel managers who have rerouted their companies through Istanbul or Singapore right now are building new preferred carrier relationships. Travel management systems are being reconfigured. Airline contracts are being renegotiated. The corporate travel that Emirates and Qatar Airways spent years winning from European carriers will not automatically flow back when the hubs reopen. It will need to be re-won against carriers that will have used this period to demonstrate their reliability on routes they had previously ceded. There is a deeper structural issue that this crisis has exposed, and I think it is the most important point in this entire video. Not so long ago, I made a video about the Russian airspace closure that followed the invasion of Ukraine. I talked about how European and American carriers lost access overnight to the most direct routing between Europe and Asia, adding hours and fuel costs that have not been recovered. I talked about how Chinese carriers retained Russian airspace access and gained a structural competitive advantage that Western carriers have been lobbying against ever since. The Russian closure was the first major warning that geopolitically driven airspace denial could permanently reshape global aviation economics. What is happening in the Gulf right now is the second warning, and it is larger. The Russian closure removed one routing corridor. The Gulf closure has removed the hub that sits at the center of the world's most commercially important connecting system. Between them, these two events have restricted airspace, covering an enormous proportion of the globe's long-haul routes simultaneously. And the question I keep coming back to is this: how did we allow this to happen? The efficiency gains that the Gulf hub model delivered over 20 years were real and genuinely valuable. Passengers got more connections, better frequencies, and lower fares on routes that previously had none of those things. The world became more connected and more affordable. I have covered this model extensively on this channel, and I have enormous respect for what Emirates, Qatar Airways, and Etihad built. But that efficiency was purchased at the cost of concentration. Over 20 years, the global aviation network concentrated a very large proportion of its connecting traffic at 3 airports in one small geographic region. As long as that region was stable, the concentration was invisible as a vulnerability. The moment it became unstable, the vulnerability became catastrophic. Engineers call this a single point of failure, a component whose failure alone brings the entire system down. Resilient systems are specifically designed to avoid single points of failure. Global aviation, it turns out, built one anyway, and we are living with the consequences right now. So where does this leave us? In the short term, the Gulf hubs will reopen. Emirates will restore its full network. Qatar Airways will return to normal operations. Etihad will be back at full schedule. The traffic will largely return, and the worst of the disruption will ease. But something will have changed permanently. And I think the aviation industry, regulators, and governments are going to have to reckon with 3 realities that this crisis has made impossible to ignore. The first is that the concentration of global connecting traffic at Gulf hubs needs to be deliberately reduced through investment in alternative connectivity. That means incentivizing more point-to-point ultra-long-haul services that bypass hubs entirely, an approach that aircraft like the Airbus A350, XLR, and Boeing 787 family are making increasingly viable. It means rebuilding European and Asian carrier capacity on routes where Gulf competition had made direct services commercially unviable. And it means accepting that some of the efficiency gains of the Gulf hub era need to be traded for the resilience that distribution across multiple hubs provides. The second is that the Russian closure and the Gulf closure together represent a fundamental change in the geopolitical environment that aviation operates within. The assumption that the sky would always be open, that geopolitics would not routinely intervene in commercial aviation routing at this scale, is no longer a safe assumption. Airlines, alliances, and governments are going to need to plan for a world where major airspace corridors can close without warning and stay closed for extended periods. The third is that the passengers who are stranded right now, the families separated across continents, the business relationships disrupted, the South Asian diaspora passengers who cannot reach elderly parents, the Australians who cannot get home, these people are the human reality behind the strategic analysis. Every structural decision that concentrated this much connectivity in one geographic region created a corresponding human vulnerability. That vulnerability is not abstract. It is real, and it is playing out on departure boards across the world right now. I have spent most of the time on this channel talking about aviation strategy, about market share and fleet decisions and loyalty programs and yield management. This is actually the moment when all of that strategy meets the real world. The Gulf went dark, and the world discovered in real time just how much of its connectivity it had quietly handed to 3 airports in one corner of the earth. The question now is what the industry is going to do about that. What is your opinion on this? Let me know in the comments down below.